Hello, welcome to Civil Discourse. I'm Jayme Marilyn.
And I'm Marilyn Brown, and today we are joined by Mende Smith, who is Santa Monica City Council, the Green Party candidate for Santa Monica City Council. So, Mende, can you just introduce yourself? We're going to be discussing Mende's campaign, and we want to hear a little bit about why you decided to run.
Well, probably the quickest answer is Bernie Sanders. After working on Bernie's campaign since October of last year, we sort of knew that it was going to be discussed. There were little pepperings of discussion about the idea of brand new Congress and what they sort of wanted to do with growing new progressives. And every meeting that he had, he would say, hey, is there anybody who's, I'm sorry, I'm going to do his voice. I'm sorry. Hey, is there anybody that's going to do, that's running for anything, or any members of any unions or what? I mean, he always would ask, especially at the first events that he was doing. And when basically he would be in rooms full of people and would say, no one would stand up, it sort of started concerning him, and he would mention it on the campaign trail that people need to be running for school board. People need to be, getting involved and getting engaged. And, without new blood sort of going into public office, we're going to literally run out, like we've run out of teachers to teach our kids. I mean, it's a very serious thing. So I thought, well, my kids are grown, and I've learned so much from, being on the campaign this year, and also all, the other work that I've done in and around politics and other campaigns, just not my own. And so I decided to go for it.
So why the Green Party and not the Democratic Party, which Bernie was running on?
Well, coming from Seattle, being raised in Washington, where you never really have to declare a party, I lived there 37 years, and I stayed voting there. Even though I lived in LA for the last 5 years, I just always voted there. I have a passport. I don't drive, so I never had to do my license and do anything down, in that way. And so it just became easier to keep voting for the policies and the candidates that I've sort of grown up with in Washington State. While living down here, we have things like election fraud and voter fraud and just all these very strange issues surrounding whether or not people can even vote, and whether they're still registered to vote, and what party they're registered to vote. I mean, it's just been absolutely insane. And so I would say the hardest decision for me about running in California and staying in California is the threat of having election fraud be something that I have to actually think about. My vote's not getting counted. And with the Green Party, after meeting Jill Stein in August and experiencing, her and learning exactly how much of the Green Party platform Bernie was running on, it really made a difference. That, the more I started looking, the more I started studying, I was like, I would find something else, and then I would find something else. And it just seemed like he borrowed like some of the most popular parts of the Green Party platform that could sort of be pulled away from everything else. Like, he didn't talk about decentralization, and he really didn't talk about disarmament very much. I mean, he just kind of skipped the whole war thing, which was like the one thing that I really can say that concerned me about Bernie from the beginning, is he just wouldn't talk about it. There were certain parts of the party platform that he just kind of steered away from. And I think I mentioned to you before when I saw you, Jayme, that I honestly believe that from the very beginning in Sanders' campaign this year, all things considered, he was just looking to get, a committee lead position or a Senate Majority Leader position in the Democratic Senate, where he's been all these years, as sort of a send-off to his career.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about the political landscape in Santa Monica and just on the local level politics? I think a lot of people very much focus on the federal level, and a lot of people don't even know how the local levels really run or organized.
Yeah, Santa Monica is really an interesting example for LA County because we have sort of a group of, residents from different neighborhoods that have lived here. Most of them say they've lived here 12 to 35 years. I mean, this is just from polling, just from talking to people, at the farmer's market, in the grocery store, and the doors that we've actually knocked. And, they're very specific parts. There's 75 precincts in this not even 9-mile city, which is really crazy, trying to get a ground game together with that many different precincts to follow. And there's really a sense of corruption and fraud and abuse, very much like what we saw in the DNC and we've heard about throughout the national campaign that Bernie was running. It's just a smaller, group of it. And we have a city that has a $6.8 million budget annually. And we have thousands of homeless people flocking here from Venice, from LA County, from Sacramento, from colder places in the country. And we basically have no plan. And I'm using the word no here because that's really what's happened. We just, for whatever reason, they've been able to get away with sort of siphoning funds and making it impossible for anyone to grow back into the community, to get out of poverty. And we now have a large number of seniors. Many of the homeless folks that I meet are, Social Security collecting age, and their money is being collected for them on behalf of them so they can still get their money. But then it goes into slush fund accounts and predatory lending type schemes, yet they're living on the street. And, it's just serious elder abuse is what it is. And we always hear about how Santa Monica is so great to the homeless, and it's really just not true. There are, very specific companies that, are sort of allowed to or ordained to take care of the homeless. But then, if something doesn't work out with one particular resident, or there is, an incident maybe where there is, some drugs being sold or some abusive situation that takes place for whatever reason, among them, then one of them is cast out, and then that service is, basically eliminated for that person. And a lot of decisions like that are made for these people. And I didn't understand at first why so many of them hung around. And then one of these women came up to us when we were canvassing at the pier a couple weeks ago and explained that, the system holds their money. And so they really are sort of stuck in a situation where they're being, held to the region, but they're not being, cared for. They're not getting to the doctor's appointments that they have, that they are, don't have medicine or ways to get to where they need to be. And, if they make it, get to a shelter past the curfew, then they can't be, they can't eat, or they can't get a place for the night. And a lot of them are arrested and rearrested. And they literally nest under the trees and all the way along the beaches. And it's just, I've met personally myself in just this campaigning since July, I've met about 150 people who have the same story.
And with meeting that many people with the same story, what do you feel like, how do you feel like the Green Party can address that in Santa Monica?
The Green Party strives for basic needs for all people. The idea of having a way of rising up out of that oppression in a way that addresses the individual, not just sort of a blanket, fix, but like having the individual causes of that poverty, of that oppression be addressed. If someone has PTSD and they were in an abusive relationship and then thrown out into the street, with a divorce or something, or situations where they've been sexually abused or had, like a long line of years of abuse. I met one woman whose husband physically abused her for 27 years. And when she finally tried to get out of the marriage, she literally got thrown out in the street and just has been there ever since. And the idea of, there being sort of a war on the poor themselves individually versus poverty itself is rampant. And especially in a place like Santa Monica where the affordable housing programs are cut to where people can't afford to live here. The apartments, are $3,000 to $6,000 a month, the ones that they're building. And, a number of the people that work here in Santa Monica take buses and public transportation and or drive 2 hours a day to get here for their day's work, and then they're back in the car and headed back wherever they came from again. So we have a real problem in this particular city of sort of looking the other way, sort of not talking, not addressing certain issues. We had a race crime not too long ago, a gentleman named Justin Palmer in Virginia Park. I don't know if you know about that. But a gentleman was literally charging his electric car at the park right across from Santa Monica College, and it got too close to 11 o'clock at night. And some, white thugs in blue came up and just wanted to know what he was doing and asked him for his ID. And because he was sort of surprised, it was sort of surprised him that he was being approached in the first place, something he's done a million times, I'm sure, just not that late at night. And obviously, dude has an electric car. He's, obviously gets it, how important it is to be environmentally savvy. And they asked him for his ID. And when he didn't drop everything, when he was actually asking, well, what am I doing? Excuse me, hands up, they tased him and then started kicking the crap out of him. And thankfully, he survived. But, we've got an on the books $1.1 million settlement that the cops and the city are having to pay this man. I don't think it's anywhere near enough. And just we have one issue after another, after another, after another, and nobody talks about it. It's just like, oh, we don't talk about that around here. We just, we're all just, rosy NIMBYs, and we don't think about, what we do to anyone else who comes into the neighborhood. And there's just a large group of people that have and a large group of people that have not. And I'm hoping that by addressing these issues with my campaign directly, we're going to make some of that dialogue start happening.
How involved is the city council in creating that kind of change or creating new policy for the police force?
Well, what we've seen just from talking with the city manager and also one of the other positions that I went and spoke with someone that actually does all of the sustainability in the city and now resilience. They've added a resilience department to sort of combat the future infrastructure of the city. Our infrastructure, just like LA, is very dated. We have 45 to 75-year-old pipes running underneath the city. And we have a water system that is failing many different places in the city. Many different residents are having problem with water. And we have the 5th dirtiest beach in the state of California. And again, the Sierra Club is here. It's like, again, the illusion is great in this little city of big influence, that, it's all cool out here by the beach. But when you start asking the right questions and asking the right people who will actually address those questions, you start realizing, wow, there's a lot more going on here that people just sort of don't ask, don't tell about. Mm-hmm. And I've gotten myself into a couple of pretty heated conversations in the last few months because of it. Because my attitude is just, well, let's fix it. Who do I need to talk to fix this? And then introduce me to that person and we'll start that conversation.
Is that where you think, I met Mindy through a variety of rallies and protests and as activists, and I find that a lot of activism tends to focus on the federal level. They're not always talking about the small kind of step-by-step thing unless you're in a very focused organization. Like I'm part of Wolfpack and it's very localized. Do you think there is strong activism within Santa Monica to get those things there, or do you think that's something you have to build?
Well, one of the things that we are dealing with this year, specifically in Santa Monica, is about 75 projects that are just very large scale, originally designed as urban interface community solutions to development. And I think it was about a year and a half ago, I might be misquoting, it might be more recent, but about that long ago, a group here in Santa Monica called Residocracy went door to door and found all of the neighbors that were tired of hearing that the building on the corner was going to be, mowed down with 6 others. And then, as soon as this one last resident has died, literally in a building, they're going to, rather than re-rent the building, they're going to destroy the building and put a 17-story tower in its place with the Starbucks and then a little, clothing shop and then these ridiculous $3,000 a month shoe boxes for people to live in Silicon Beach, and drop that right in the middle of a residential neighborhood where, they're going to rip out trees and just completely recreate the wheel that is sort of a functioning ecosystem. And they all stood up, and this amazing grassroots activism with, whether it's ladies who just on their bike route had somebody walk up to them and say, hey, did you know that this building is going to be torn down and the city has already sold the land? And people started going, well, just a second, what about, having a community meeting? When you got public notices in most cities, there's a public notice and there's a period where you get to speak about that. This city just kind of skips a lot of that. And they're real good. There's a lot of realtors, very, very questionable realtors that somehow get in there, have been in here for years, and work the room, so to speak, and get, grandma off to some home or some building or some program, find the far distant family members that will agree to a quick deed sale. And then you see these signs going up. And oh, by the way, the Miramar wants to be 120 stories instead of what it is, currently, that kind of thing. And this group of, I call them the angry grannies at this point, because a lot of them are older women and they had intended to retire here. They raised their families here. A lot of them are, closer to being retired. And they just kind of said enough is enough. And they went out and got signatures at the farmers markets and got it put on the ballot to have the land use voter initiative. And it literally stops all building without a vote. And I personally am totally impressed with that. If that's not grassroots activism, I don't know what is. And it's really, I found it just, very, very cool that people would get this organized and say enough is enough. And as a Green Party candidate, I'm supporting that wholeheartedly because it's going to work. Chances are it will pass. The city incumbents, the 4 that are, trying to get reelected, have all spoken out against the measure for obvious reasons. A lot of them take money from developers and don't even deny it anymore. But there's kind of, a good old boys club and an old guard that's been just not addressing residents and not talking with voters. and sort of doing what they want. Even some members of the police department work 3 days a week. And we've got members here in the city that make $200,000 to $400,000 a year. And it's like, this is so screwed up. Like, it's screwed up in so many ways that it kind of became like, you know, a come to Jesus karma moment that I ran in this city. Because we're talking to people, we're addressing all of these issues, and we're telling them that we're going to do everything we can to change it.
What has the reception to your campaign been from both your constituents and your competitors? Because I know the Green Party in general is very much a party of activists, and it's very grassroots, and it does things very differently than the other parties, frankly, do it. And I know you've been knocking on doors, which none of your other opponents are really doing. How's been the reception to your campaign?
Well, we have community forums here. I believe this is one of the first years that they haven't done like a squirm night where they have, you know, debates and you actually get together and they sort of pit someone against someone else and they have sort of an actual debate. We sort of skipped that this year, partly because the local media, the local party, the local Democratic Party, the League of Conservation Voters, the Sierra Club, the sort of old guard I was talking about, all have discovered that in order to move forward with all of the building and development plans that they've kind of got in the pipeline, they need to have the same characters installed in those seats. And it's really interesting when you sit down as an outsider, especially, you know, I'm not a Samuel High graduate. I wasn't raised in this city. I've only been here, you know, as an adult and living alone. And so, you know, I don't have kids in the school district. I am coming from a very strong place of activism and just, you know, my lifetime of activism, community involvement, urban renewal development, and nonprofit management. So all of those things sort of, you know, are all of the skills that I have. I mean, I'm not a lawyer. I can read some contracts pretty easily, pretty effectively. I've got a pretty good command of the language. And because I'm not sort of stuck in this installed government, I am that much better of a candidate as far as a lot of the community has relayed to me, that they really like the fact that I'm not, you know, stuck in all. I don't owe any of these people anything. I'm not bought and paid for. I'm not for sale. The Green Party does not take corporate money. I can't take money from PACs. So I really do work for the residents and for the voters. And I tell everybody, you know, at the minute that I look like I'm going down Shill Road, stop voting for me because I don't belong in government anymore. I mean, it seems like if more of us were honest about why we got involved in the first place, you know, the idea of being the change. If I can come in, I mean, think about what an amazing thing it will be if someone on the outside like me is able to come into a city, get elected, and start changing the policies back to support the people as they were in the 60s and 70s. And I don't have, you know, some big dollar family or big Mondo PAC behind me that's empowering me to do it. And then all of the people who have said for so long that things are messed up and they've even moved out, sold their properties and left because they throw up their hands instead of throwing up a sign in the yard and getting signatures and deciding that you're going to run and make real change. And I think you kind of have to get your ego out of it and just say, hey, what needs to be done? And if I can do something in this community to make a difference, then that's a positive thing. And maybe I can empower other girls, other women, other people to stand up and do the same. We need to grow our government. It's the only way that we're going to restore ourselves from corruption in every city, in every town, all the way across the country. We have to step up.
Yeah, I love that. And I love what you were saying about, well, I don't love what you were saying about the corruption and the manipulation within the local government, but it's interesting because we've seen so much through this campaign of things I think most people knew, but we now have proof of the manipulation and a lot of the corruption that happens within government. And I think people focus on that federal level, that macro level corruption, and don't realize that it really is all the way to the root levels and the local level. It's all there, and you really can make a lot of change by running for local office and fighting for those propositions at the local level and all those things, getting signatures. Probably the best way to do it and the fastest way is to do it locally, because when you change it locally, it forces the states to respond, which forces the federal level to respond. So often we just focus on the federal level and then get frustrated that nothing's happening. But there's these other things we can be doing smaller. Yeah, it's not as gratifying because you're not getting the big win right off the bat, but you're building the foundation to get that win.
Yeah.
What do you think are the biggest misconceptions just about the Green Party?
Well, I think it's sort of pigeoned as like the party of the environment and nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
And people will be like, oh yeah, I like the environment. Oh yeah, you guys are you guys are tree huggers, right? Hippie dictators and tree huggers. And, a lot of people think the green is like, as in the Green Party,
That green, yeah.
Oh my God, this is so funny. No, that's actually the Libertarian Party. And, so there's misconceptions about that. And then I think the one other thing that people think is that it's like sort of just this thing that doesn't really exist. It's like a misnomer of a party, like, oh, well, you could always, run with the Greens, like then you won't get elected. It's not, you're really not taken seriously unless you step up in the red or the blue team. And that's absolutely false. In 90 countries around the world, the Green Party is established. There are Green parties everywhere that actually have had viable elections and viable candidates. The first time I was ever encountered with the party was when I was on vacation in Peru in 1998. And there was a President Ito, the Japanese president, that they were in the process of overthrowing to get him the heck out. Literally the first week we were there on a month-long trip, they threw the president out. There was a full coup. And they were, scrambling to try and find other parties to step up and take his place. And the election involved some Green Party members who were just starting with, they called the Rangers at the time, the party that was coming in to make sure that they didn't, overdevelop Machu Picchu and all of the ruin sites where wealthy people want to live and look right across at Machu Picchu. And they were, really fighting that, having, Japanese companies with condominiums, like literally scraping the skies in the Amazon. And it was really a thing. And it was really eye-opening for me. And then going to, on a 3-hour boat ride across Lake Titicaca at the top of the world to a little tiny place called Tequila Island, meeting the Tequila Indians. And they literally had members of the Green Party passing out ice cream bars to all of the indigenous people because they wanted votes. And I thought, wow, that's really something. Like, it's a hot day. They probably don't see a whole lot of ice cream. And I thought, wow, that's really cool, the party of ice cream. So it kind of made an impression and stuck in my head. And I still think of it, like today, I still think of that when I think of the Green Party.
Yeah, I think another big misconception, I don't think it's necessarily with the Green Party, but just with third party politics and I think electoral politics, in general is you hear a lot of the narrative that, well, they should focus on the local level and not the presidential level. And people don't realize that the way the vast majority of states work is you need, if you're not one of the two major parties, you need crazy amounts of signatures and ballot initiatives to even get on the ballot. So you would literally spend all your time, all your resources trying to get these signatures, and most local candidates, it's unrealistic to get the amount they need. They pretty much need the same amount that the presidential candidate can get. And what they don't know is that if there is a presidential candidate and they're on the ballot, all the local level candidates can run on the ballot without having to get those signatures. So
Right.
a big part of that is also 5% of the vote. People often say, well, you're reaching too far for the president. But it's like, well, really, we're reaching for 5%, because at 5%, we get federal matching funds and we get automatic ballot access in any state where we had 5%. So we don't have to use all of our resources to get on the ballot and have no funds left on that, and then say, oh, now we have to compete with someone who has, I think Hillary Clinton has like $800 million in this election or something crazy like that.
$100,000 a plate. Like if I had $100,000, first of all, nobody that I know would give me $100,000. So there's that. But the idea of people equating pay to play to our politics on the massive scale is, I mean, again, we have a lot. We have Bernie to thank for how much he highlighted this before he sort of decided to just go back and do the Senate. Mm-hmm. But it's actually 5% of the popular vote, Jayme. I didn't know that. Yes. It's actually 5% of the popular vote. Mm-hmm. And we are
only in the states that we're in. So we're only in 45 states that aren't right in. Yeah. So it would be those 45 states we would automatically get ballot access. Correct.
Yeah. And we are required to run. This is one of my favorite arguments, because we aren't allowed to run in off years. I mean, you have to move with the president. So it always sets up a spoiler situation, as they say. There's no way to avoid it. And more of the arguments, I mean, I've stopped right there once I tell people, look, it's not our choice. We don't just all of a sudden go, hey, we're the Greens, check us out. It's that we're required to do that in the major party election years. And so it puts us in that constant position to where we're pissing someone off. Right. I mean, there's just no way around that.
And can you talk about ranked choice voting?
Ranked choice voting is something that we are really strongly advocating for all the way across the country. There's an actual ranked choice voting initiative on the ballot in Maine coming up November 8th, which is awesome, where you basically have your candidates, like in a situation, what we have here in Santa Monica, where the four incumbents are, traditionally hated. And it's really sad to use the word hated, but that's really what we've come down to, is there's just this real angst that is unhealthy with regard to our elected officials in this little town. And, the idea of ranked choice voting means that, no one has to vote for those four people. They can vote for other people. And what you do is you vote your first choice, your second choice, your third choice, and your fourth choice. And then through process of elimination, the people who don't get votes just disappear. And it literally puts the control right back where it needs to be, with the people who are able to say, absolutely not. No more of my tax dollars are going to be allocated for funds that I am not acknowledging, and programs that have been closed off, like when Jerry Brown went into office again. All of the education programs that were shut down. The idea of starting with the poorest and the most underprivileged of our citizens and taking money from them first has been a Democratic nightmare and a Republican nightmare since this country began. Yeah. And I honestly believe that there is sort of a well of fear and unknown, like uncertainty with the Green Party, because people don't really know how to place, well, who's going to be the bad guy if we have a Green Party president or we have Green senators? Where do they sit in the Senate? Do they sit in the same place? Is there a different order? Who are their constituents? Who are these mysterious people who are members of the Green Party? And the unknown is what's also holding a lot of people who really truly believe and have admitted that they really truly believe a third party needs to happen in this country. They just don't want to be the ones to stand up and make it happen. They don't want the revolution to be their revolution. They just sort of want to experience it after it's already done. And at another time in our country history, when this happened, I call it the hippie diaspora. When all of the hippies the women were burning their bras, a lot of them had free education because they came to California to go to school in Berkeley, and, did a lot of drugs on the beaches and just sort of had their whole anti-war movement that was really strong. And then after they got their degrees, they sort of went, oh, instead of working at my mom's business, now I can go work for a corporation. And so that's kind of what happened. People stopped working in the public works jobs and in the city jobs and stopped being teachers at the schools where they themselves went to school, and started working for big, gigantic companies like GE and Boeing. I was a Boeing brat. Both of my parents went to work for Boeing in Washington, which is why I wasn't born in California. Otherwise, I would have been born here as well. And when our industry leaves our main streets and leaves the infrastructure behind, of where, again, people who can't afford to mobilize, they can't just hop on a bus and move from where they are in Chicago or move from where they are in some little New Mexican town. We are literally leaving, isolating, and destroying the infrastructure of these places, allowing them to decay. And then when we turn, say, 60 years old and we want to go back to our hometown, we look around and go, gee, what happened to this place? This isn't what it was like when I grew up in 1957. Mm-hmm. And it keeps happening over and over and over again. And nobody wants to be responsible for it.
Like, we get disconnected, we disconnect, and then we wonder what happened to it afterwards. We want to come back and think it's going to be the same, but we don't want to participate in the upkeep and in the maintenance part.
Right.
Yeah.
And especially when, I talked to one guy while campaigning at the farmer's market a few weeks ago, and he was talking about how his son went to Samo High and then went to Virginia Tech. So he went somewhere far away, went to school, went to college, got a degree in public works engineering, and then got a job in Virginia. Mm-hmm. And didn't even think for 1 second about coming back and working for the utilities here.
Yeah.
And a lot of younger people feel that way. My daughter's going to Portland State University and studying environmental science. And she is looking forward to going and seeing how to stabilize water systems and food systems all over the world. And that's what she wants to do. She wants to spend time interning and just going all over and seeing what works in different places and bringing that back home, wherever home is going to be. But there are a lot of millennials that are doing the same thing. They're starting to look outside. They're sort of in the position where they want to learn more and they want to learn effective work so that they're doing work that matters. And I think that is so awesome. And my kid is doing exactly what I wanted to do, which is way cool. The more people realize that the systems are broken everywhere. You don't have to go to Somalia to find plumbing that doesn't work. Or you don't have to go to South America to see deforestation. It's everywhere. when you all of a sudden, read about something like the Dakota Access Pipeline that's affecting the First People and their actual land that they've been given by the Laramie Treaty that's totally being ignored. Our government is doing that. Obama is doing that. I helped get Obama elected. I worked through Rock the Vote, and it pisses me off every day when people are saying things about him that it turns out to be true. And the drone president, the president of poverty, Obamacare is a travesty. They knew it was going to be. All the crazy Republicans that stood up and said, don't do it, don't do it, are now the ones that, were sort of right about what was going to happen. And man, at 43 years old, Jayme, I'm going to listen. I'm going to start listening more and just really educating myself. And it's something Ajamu Baraka was talking about when we saw him in Houston, saying, if you don't know the answer, find the answer. And if more of us would just find the answer, I think we would all be in a much better place all the way across the country and the world, actually.
I think it's interesting because I feel like there's, from the establishment, and from older generations, this push against what seems, we were talking about millennials, about this idealism of the millennials. And I think where that comes from is kind of what you're saying, is there's so much talk about, is this incrementalism. And what ends up happening is we get stuck in this rut because we focus on this idea of compromise. What compromise ends up meaning is, okay, we want to help these people, so let's add that, but we need to compromise, so now we're going to hurt these people. So everything, it's like this back and forth. Like, I feel like Obamacare was very much like that. It was, we're going to try to get kids on their plans longer and help these people, but then it gave more power to the pharmaceutical companies, so then prices went up and people couldn't afford it. So then it's like, well, did it help more people than it hurt because they had to compromise, or they felt like they had to compromise? And I think millennials are really seeing that, and especially since we get our media from alternate sources and not the mainstream media, we have this idealism because we feel it's the only way that we can move forward, and it's going to actually work and create a better world that's not constantly going between helping these people and hurting these other people and back and forth between the two.
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting. And, hearing from people who on the street will be standing at like the, co-op and picking out strawberries, and we start talking about, the fiscal failures of this city. And, I'm talking as a candidate and this person is talking as a long-term resident, and they know so much more and like can paint an entire picture of when and how it went bad. And I'm looking at these, incredibly intelligent people that say that they would never, ever consider going into office. And it's like, but so much, why, just what you just told me inspired me so much, why not do it yourself? And there's been a real disconnect, and people's just saying, that's not for me. I do not need the stress. And it's like, wow.
Well, I think it's with revolution or with massive change, there always has to be those few leaders who are ready to jump in, because I can see why people feel that way, because they just feel there's nothing that, even if they were elected, they would be fought against the whole time. There's nothing that they can really do. And once people like yourself step up and actually start creating change, I think more people will start to have a different view and jump on board.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, there has to be those kind of brave pioneers who lead the way, and show that it can be done.
My daughter told me, Mom, you're stupid, but it's okay.
But it's like you were talking about Bernie.
Stupid. Somebody's got that.
It was like you were talking about with Bernie Sanders and how he would at the beginning be like, who's running, and no one would stand up, and then you had the brave few, and now there's massive movements to get Bernie-crats running. There's brand new Congress and our revolution and all these things that grew out from no one wanting to stand up potentially. So
I know. I was like, when he made politics cool again. I think it's very, I think it's very cool. And then, I mean, here also another thing that's weird about Santa Monica is they didn't have anyone running for school board this year, so they just didn't have an election. And I've never heard of that in my life. I mean, call me crazy, but like I've
So they're
never
not
heard.
going to have a.
They're
just
not
not replacing anybody.
They're all just going to stay doing nothing. And I mean, Santa Monica is actually one of the few cities in California that has a public education fund where it actually gives money to the school district. It's actually the Santa Monica Malibu School District and the two cities together. And they've like had to hire people from the outside to supposedly help them reconfigure their school system and their funding and the education programs that have been failing, and the numbers, the class size, everything is just in a horrible state. And I mean, I'm really fortunate that I don't have school age kids that I have to deal with. I talk to moms every day who are like, can you help us with this? And it's like, well, I can try from my side of, we've got the Santa Monica College Board, and then we have the city council, and then we have the school board. So they're kind of sort of kept separate. And that's another part of the problem, I think, in this city is accountability. That's sort of like, oh, that's, not my area. And then just crickets. Like you don't hear, and it's like, well, okay, but if or you'll hear this terrible story about this embezzlement or something that happened, and then you'll say, oh, well, wow, whatever happened to that person? And it's like, oh, well, they're still there. And it's like, what? I mean, totally beyond me with accountability, with transparency. I'm going to propose a bill for term limits for all of them. If elected, and I've told a lot of residents about that. I've also told residents that they need to not just vote for one. They can't just fall in love with one candidate. We really need to vote out all 4 of the incumbent spots, because we still have 3 people who are corrupt in their own ways, who people don't like, that happen to be sitting in their seats comfortably and cozily for the time being. And the idea of having to work with some of these usual suspects every day doesn't thrill me. If I was to be, 1 seat out of, 3 more returning incumbents, there'd be 6 of them and 1 of me. So I really don't want to be Bernie Sanders squawking in the empty room if I can avoid it. It's a 4-year position, and I'm intending to go for Congress after I get my feet wet and learn how to do this stuff like a pro. So eventually everybody can vote for me in California.
Yay! Well, thank you so much. It was so nice talking to you, and I wish you luck, even though I don't think you really need it.
Well, you've been canvassing, Jayme. You've been amazing.
I know. We've been on the ground doing as much work as we can, so got to create change where we can, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Have a
Thanks,
wonderful night.
guys. Peace.